Yes, I am dealing with some issues. Whenever the pollen gets up pretty high, thank you, I get real dizzy, and my world just sort of spins around like this. And plus, I've had some stomach issues this morning that have not manifested themselves, but they are talking to me. So, what a better introduction to the sermon on trials than that. Which reminds me, would you all, everybody in this room has permission to remind me never to do another sermon series on joy. Especially back roads to joy. Because every week without fail, it's almost like God saying to me, Seth, I know you can talk about this, but I'm going to take you on this back road this week. I'm going to reroute you this week. Then get up and talk about it. So guess what my week has been like this week? I guess I'm not the only one. All right. Well, the back road here is trials. And the joy that, the particular definition of joy for this one is the joy of maturity. And yet, this is one of those great paradoxes of the Christian life, where the farther along you go in maturity, it seems to you and it feels like you're becoming less mature. And that's certainly been true for me this week. This is one of those things where this message is for when you feel like, golly, I'm just such a spiritual loser, and I just feel like such a failure, and you seem like you're carrying around guilt and shame with you, and though you know the gospel is true, you just wonder, am I making any progress at all? I had lunch with Alex this week for his birthday, and he was a real encouragement to me by just sharing some things he saw in my life, and I was just thinking, wow, I just don't see those things. And we really need other people to be some eyes for us and our ear and to help us see what God is doing in our life. So if you've missed some of the messages so far, joy is not happiness and it's not pleasure. Joy is something that is uniquely Christian. And it has different definitions. I think of joy as an umbrella term that has lots of different facets to it or applications to it or ways that it seems. And in your handout, I have just this quick summary of some of these. Certainty, that anchor in the soul. A hunger for the things of God and to be different. Belovedness, glad surrender, delightful dependence, and pouring out the love of Christ for somebody else. And then the reroutes to joy. Great. You know, the shattered dreams was our first one. Unmet longings, brokenness, loss of control in our world, a fallen world, and heartache. And each of these, I think of, these are ways to understand what is God doing in my life when things just seem like they're going off the rails. These are categories in which to think. And instead of just wondering, well, God, what are you up to? And you just seem a million miles away, and why aren't you helping me? Or generically, I know you're up to something. Well, he is up to something, but he's up to some particulars. And this series is about what are some of those particulars. So our route to joy for today is trials. And our definition of joy is maturity. Although I want to add a quick caveat as we get into this. This kind of maturity, as I mentioned earlier, does not often feel like I'm becoming mature, or I am quite mature, or I can see the progress. So there's two types of this joy of maturity. There's the one at the end when I'll look back, or those particular points in time when I get a fresh look and I can see, God, you are changing me. He's talking about that kind of joy. But the second kind of joy he's talking about is more of an anticipatory joy, that I long to be mature. I don't seem to be mature as I want to be, but I long to be. I hunger to be a man like Christ and to live like him and to honor him. So those are two different kinds of joy that we'll look at here. These are very familiar verses from James 1, 2 through 4. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials. For you know the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Now, again, this is one of those just great paradoxes of the Christian faith, and you may wonder, how in the world does joy relate to trials? He says, count it all joy, and that word count is a Greek word hegemai, and it means, it's a banking term. It means that somebody has reckoned how much money is in my checking account. We bank at Wells Fargo. And over the years, there have been a few times when I've made a mistake in my ledger at home, and a few times I thought I had more money in my checking account than we really did. When I got the bank statement, I had a reckoning. Now, the bank reckons this for me. And in all my years of having a bank account, back in Texas, only one time has there been a bank error that I've been. And I wanted to get that Monopoly card. Bank error in your favor, collect $20. It doesn't matter how much I think is in my checking account. What matters is how much Wells Fargo thinks is in my checking account. Now, that's the word he uses here. Count it as if it's true. Or in the South, we used to say, whenever you realize, you thought this, but you realize that's not true, it's this, we would say, reckon so. Reckon so. Meaning, I'm going with that. Now, that's the term he uses here. Count it all joy when you meet various trials. And the question here is, well, what kind of joy is he talking about? And he uses a little adjective here. He says, all joy. And so it makes me wonder, is there more than one kind of joy that he's talking about regarding trials? And there's at least two that I think he's talking about, which we'll look at here. Now, in your handout, I've taken the verses and made a little schematic. And let's go to that on our next slide. And the schematic, it talks about joy, count it joy when you meet trials. Trials are going to test you. Testing is going to produce steadfastness. Steadfastness is going to produce maturity. And then there's a joy that's coming. Now, here on this schematic are the two kinds of joy I think he's talking about. When you count it all joy at the beginning, you don't feel joyful. You feel discouraged. You feel aggravated. You feel fearful. You think, oh, what am I going to do? But the kind of joy he's talking about is anticipated joy. I know what's going to come down the pike, and I can count on that. And then at the end, there's a realized joy, which is going to happen at the end of my life, but at different times in our lives, occasionally we get a chance, we see, wow, God, you are changing me. You're making me a different man. And there's a joy that comes out of that. Now, what about trials? Trials, it's the Greek word parosmos, and it just means difficulties, and he uses an adjective when you meet various trials, and the Greek word various means multicolored. All kinds of trials, doesn't matter what they are. All of them will fit into this. Now, when I think about difficulties he's talking about, I don't think he's really talking about difficulties that annoy us. He's specifically talking about difficulties that test us. That test us. You know, the testing of your faith. Now, when I think about being tested, what kind of testing is he talking about? He's not talking about the kind of test that you and I took in college where, you know, you're trying to make a good grade and, you know, and one of my classes, when I took my Old Testament class before I became a Christian, I think I got a 39 on my first test. And that's not good when you're a pre-med student, to have a 39 on a test. But that's not the kind of test he's talking about here, where it's a pass-fail and is God testing me and I hope I pass the test. That's not the kind of test he's talking about. The testing he's talking about is the kind that the gold miners in the 1849 gold rush, when they would think they discovered gold, they would go to town to the assayer's office, and they would take the little nuggets to him, and he would test them to see whether it was real gold or fool's gold. That's the kind of testing that James is talking about here. He's testing our faith. And what does this feel like? Or what does it seem like? There are two ways that I think this happens that are in your handout. Trials expose the kind of faith that we have. Now, there are two kinds of exposures here. One is it exposes our faith in general, and I think that's what, as Christians, we're most aware of. And when we go through trials, what all of a sudden seems crazy to us is my faith seems pretty puny in a generic sense. But the second kind of testing, and I think more specifically he means here, is that there are particular aspects of our faith that are tested. For example, it's been a long time since I've had any questions or doubted my assurance of salvation. That one seems to be pretty tidied up and wrapped up. It took me a couple years after I became a Christian, many, many, many years ago. But there are other things that, man, they just eat my lunch, where my faith does seem puny in particulars. Or you may be strong regarding faith regarding finances. But when it comes to your marriage or some friendships, and you just feel like, very puny faith here. So trials expose. Secondly, trials sharpen and shape. So the trials here shape us. We are being tested and shaped. Now, why? There are two reasons for joy. Reason number one is steadfastness. The testing of your faith produces steadfastness. The word steadfastness is hupomonen, which is a Greek prefix and a Greek root word. The root word monen means endurance. And when you add the word hupo, we use the word hype, like hyped up. Or this is endurance on steroids. One of the Bible translators translates this word patient endurance. Endurance over a long period of time with an aspect of patience. Or another Bible translator in different parts of the New Testament uses this, translate this word to bear up courageously. To bear up courageously through trials. Now, why is steadfastness so important? Because it is the key ingredient, James says here, in our transformation, in becoming mature. Verse 4 says, let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. These two words, Greek words, are amazing words. The first word, perfect, is the Greek word telestai, from which we get our word telescope. And the telescope it was named this because you could look through that little eye in the telescope and you can see a long, long, long way out. Telestai is also a Greek word that means the final end or the purpose of something, that for which we're striving. So that becoming perfect like Christ is what's trying to happen here. Or it can be translated finished or fully grown. And then the word complete is holokoroi, and it means to be made whole. That there's something broken in me, something that doesn't work like it's supposed to in my soul, in my heart, and my character. And God is slowly making me whole. That event that you ladies are invited to tomorrow night will be a living demonstration of this. Can God really take the fragments of my life and sometimes the broken pieces that I just think, God, I have made such a mess of myself. Can you really put things together? Can you really change me? And make me a whole person, a person that be like Christ. And then the joy of maturity, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet in various trials. So let's go back to our next slide. Let's go back to, keep going, let's go back to keep going to the schematic. There we go. So as we wrap up this message here, these are the main things, or you can think of these as these are the signposts along the way of being rerouted. At the very beginning comes trials, and at that very moment, as you are being rerouted, he says, there's opportunity for anticipated joy. And as you go down this back road, the next signpost you're going to come to is testing. And you're going to feel like you are being exposed, or things that are in your heart are being exposed for you to see. Some things that are sometimes very, very humbling. And then also its shaping goes on. Steadfastness is the key ingredient that he talks about, that patient endurance to bear up courageously in the midst of trials. And what's being shaped out of that is maturity, Christian maturity. Now, it often doesn't feel in real life like maturity. I don't particularly feel mature. It doesn't seem to me like I'm all that mature, oftentimes. Day in, day out. That's how it looks through these eyes to me, these glasses to me. And yet, I know that I am changing and that God is changing me. And I think the reason why there's just such a paradox here is because I know way more about me than I knew 46 years ago when I became a Christian. My heart is a wreck. There is so much that needs to be changed. And so I think this helps explain this paradox of how can I feel on one hand so immature, and yet on the other hand, God really is changing me. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be complete, lacking in nothing. I want to finish with a story. I had lunch with a couple of pastor friends of mine this week, and one of my friends' names is James, and he's an Asian pastor, a UCLA graduate. He's a very sharp fellow. He's about 45 years old. Pastors a church of mostly Asians. They're about church size of about 60 people, adults and kids. And he had one particular man in the church about his age, with kids about his age, that was a hypercritical person. And it's just been one of those just thorns in the flesh type of people to my friend James. And just kind of like none of the things you do are really good enough. Sort of that's the effect of this friend. And finally, he told James that he was going to leave the church. And James was sad about that in one sense. And the guy kept emailing him some, and it's just kind of been, this lingering thing. But the thing he said that was so difficult about this was that in a church their size, a lot of his kids, I think, are 10 and 8. And in a church that size, a lot of the families that are in that church do things together, kids things, outings and stuff like that, with this family that left. And this guy puts a lot of these things together. He's kind of a natural leader. But my friend's kids are excluded from those. They're not invited to those things. And the kids are old enough at 10 and 8 that they know that. And they come to him and they say, Daddy, how come we weren't invited to that? And my friend says, what do I tell them? Do I tell them the truth about the man that left? He said, I can't do that. And then he said, I can tell that I just need a heart that forgives more. And he choked up. And he said, I'm just not there. And I said to him, it seems that way. And it feels that way, doesn't it? And he said, yes. I said, but it's not that way. Because what you're thinking about is you have a vision of what it would be like to be perfect and complete now. And that's not true. We're not perfect and complete now. So what does maturity look like? Maturity looks like, and I told him, the longing you just expressed. I long to be a man that forgives better than I do, and to be a better friend than I've been. That's maturity. That's what Christ is forming in you. That's what it looks like, that longing to be mature. Let's pray together. Lord, sometimes these things get so complicated, and we thank you that you have given us the Bible that helps us to be able to read signposts in our life that we would, without the Bible, we would be blind to. Maybe you're here this morning and you're thinking, what in the world am I doing with my life? The thing that I heard in worship, the thing that I saw in worship, the thing that I felt around me from the people in this room as we worshiped was they have something going on with Jesus that is making a profound difference in their lives, and I just don't have that. Welcome to the club. The gospel invites you to turn from what the Bible calls sin and self-centeredness and our pride in thinking we can run our life. It invites you to lay those things down. The Bible calls that repenting, to turn away from those things and to accept the free gift that God offers you by the giving up of his Son, Jesus Christ, for you. To die on a cross, die for your sins, and to bring new life by him coming into your heart and living there, beginning his work of transformation. As we've talked about today, the process towards maturity. If you've never given your life to Christ, you can pray, you can do it a simple prayer. Just pray something like this: Lord Jesus, I know I am a sinner, a wanderer, a rebel. Thank you for forgiving me of all my sin. Thank you for dying on the cross for me. Thank you for shedding your blood. Thank you for taking me just as I am, all my brokenness, and coming into my life